The cabin shuddered with a loud bang, the cold air rushed in, and the oxygen mask dropped down. The 117 terrified passengers were staring at a 5-foot hole that ruptured their Boeing 737-300. One of them sent a text to his wife, saying, "Plane is going down, I love you." It started as a regular flight from Phoenix to Sacramento on April 1, 2011. Takeoff and initial climb-out went as usual. But as the plane approached its cruising altitude of 34,000 feet, one of the ceiling panels fell down. A couple of seconds later, the captain informed everyone that the cabin had lost pressurization and instructed passengers to put on their oxygen masks. The sound of rushing wind grew louder. The captain quickly declared an emergency to air traffic control and was granted permission for an emergency descent. The pilots brought the aircraft down to 11,000 feet, where the air pressure was high enough to keep enough oxygen in the body tissues. Soon after, flight attendants reported an injury and a 2-foot hole in the fuselage. The pilots then requested to descend further to 9,000 feet. Ground control directed them to the nearest airport capable of handling a 737. It was Yuma International Airport. One of the flight attendants rushed to make an interphone call to the pilots or a PA announcement instead of immediately putting on his oxygen mask, so he lost consciousness, fell, and broke his nose. Other than that, there were luckily no injuries or major damage. The plane landed successfully and all the passengers survived. As it turned out later, it all happened because one of the joints failed much earlier than Boeing's engineers expected. Another plane that got into serious trouble was carrying 440 passengers and 29 crew members, 5 of whom were pilots. The flight was going from London to Sydney with a stopover in Singapore. It completed the first leg of the journey without a problem, took on fuel, more passengers, and a new crew to carry on to Australia. It took off and moved southeast across the strait toward Indonesia, passing over the densely populated island of Batam. After 4 minutes in the air, right after passing an altitude of 7,000 feet, one of the engines failed. Fragments of a turbine disc were tearing through its wings and fuselage in multiple places. The Big Bang severely damaged every critical system on board, including the flight controls, fuel tanks, hydraulics, and pneumatics. With a flood of failure warnings and an aircraft in unknown condition, the flight crew had to quickly assess the situation and make the right decisions to bring the massive jet down safely. They also had to deal with malfunctioning landing gear, a loss of braking power, and an engine that refused to shut down. Against all odds, they managed to land the plane flawlessly. All 469 passengers and crew walked away without a single injury. As it turned out later, an oil pipe in one of the engines had walls that were slightly too thin, and it led to all this. On May 24, 1988, TACA International Flight 110 took off from Belize City, heading to New Orleans with 38 passengers and 7 crew members aboard. The aircraft was new and everything was going smoothly until the plane approached New Orleans and encountered severe thunderstorms. The pilots tried their best to navigate through the storm, but as they descended through thick clouds at 16,500 feet, both engines suddenly lost power. The plane was gliding toward the ground through extreme rain and hail with no thrust. The pilots tried to restart the engines using airflow, but even when they turned them back on, they didn't produce enough of it to reach the airport. The pilots realized they wouldn't make it to New Orleans International Airport, so they declared an emergency and considered a water landing in the Louisiana wetlands. Air traffic controllers suggested an alternate airport, but the plane didn't have enough altitude or speed to reach it. But then the first officer noticed a grassy levee that could work as a runway. The captain quickly changed course and managed to do the impossible and landed the plane on the narrow strip of grass. It suffered minimal damage, and every passenger and crew member walked away unharmed. On October 16, 1956, Pan Am Flight 6 was on the final leg of an around-the-world journey when it took off from Honolulu, Hawaii for San Francisco. Everything seemed normal on the 4-engine propeller-driven aircraft until about 1:20 a.m., when the number 1 engine began to malfunction. The first officer tried to reduce power and lower the flaps to slow the plane down. It was impossible because the propeller continued to windmill and created extra drag. The crew was struggling to keep control of the plane. But then, the number 4 engine also started failing. Soon it began backfiring, so they had to shut it down completely. Now running on just 2 engines, the plane couldn't maintain speed or altitude. They did some math and figured they didn't have enough fuel to reach San Francisco or return to Honolulu. That's when the captain radioed an emergency call. He knew that it would be too dangerous to try a water landing in the dark, so the captain decided to keep the plane in the air until dawn. He guided the aircraft toward a Coast Guard cutter stationed in the Pacific. When it was above the ship, the plane circled at 2,000 feet, then climbed up again to burn extra fuel and make it lighter. The captain asked passengers sitting in the back and near the engines to move forward. As dawn broke and waves started rising, he knew it was time. The crew made the final approach. The plane's tail snapped off upon impact and the nose dipped underwater. But thanks to their careful planning and the swift response of rescue boats, every passenger and crew member was safely rescued before the aircraft sank. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Dallas Love Field on April 17, 2018, was carrying 144 passengers and 5 crew members. At 32,000 feet, the left engine suddenly blew up and its pieces were flying around. The wing and fuselage were damaged and shattered a window in row 14. This caused rapid decompression. The pilots immediately began an emergency descent and changed course toward Philadelphia International Airport. The plane tilted hard to the left. Alarms started going off. The pilots put on their oxygen masks and fought to regain control. But even after getting it back on track, the damage made it incredibly difficult to fly. When the captain found out one of the passengers needed immediate medical help, she tried to speed things up and managed to land safely in Philadelphia. Sadly, even that and all the efforts of the flight attendants didn't help, and the passenger who was sitting in row 14 passed away. But thanks to the quick thinking and skills of the pilot and flight attendants, a much bigger disaster was prevented. Air Transat Flight 236 was cruising from Canada to Portugal when 3 hours and 46 minutes into the journey, a fuel leak developed in the right engine. The pilots didn't realize it at first. They thought faulty sensors were giving them incorrect readings. For over an hour, they continued flying as normal, until they realized something was seriously off and diverted to the Azores for an emergency landing. By then, it was almost too late. The right engine failed when they still had over 170 miles to go. 75 miles out, the left engine also gave out, so the plane was completely powerless at 34,500 feet. The crew warned air traffic control that they might have to ditch into the dark and rough waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The impact could have shattered the plane, and the people on board would have minimal chances to survive. The pilots didn't give up and managed to glide nearly 75 miles and safely touch down. The moment the wheels hit the runway, the crew immediately started an emergency evacuation. Everyone on board survived, and they set a world record. The flight, later nicknamed the Azores Glider, became the longest passenger aircraft glide without engines ever recorded. Wow! That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.